well, constitutional implementation for 10 years now, is an election issue in 2022. And Sheila, you go first.
They've tried to pretend that it is an election issue, I think, because they have...
I like your choice of
yeah, well, that's true, because at the front of it, you've had one, I think it's Kenya Kwanza, which says that half of the appointments will go to cabinet. Half of the appointments in cabinet will go to women.
Yes.
But then I already look at it from the optics, like when, you know, you're out there, who's around you? You know, that messaging should start from now. Who's around you? Very few women, you know, already occupying those high places within that particular lands. But it's not just that. As you know well, they have nominated a woman for the running. But then it's more or less about optics, because when you looked at the party lists, you remember the party lists that IBC, you know, did not allow and said that parties needed to resubmit new lists. If they couldn't even present us enough women as required as per the constitutional threshold during the listing of people to be nominated, do we really trust that they will then offer those appointive positions? Because for me, it's really promises. But I don't think that the gender issue has been a strong matter that we have really canvassed during this campaign season. We've not given it enough attention. And just one thing, because we've talked about it on the issue of what Maure proposes in terms of procurement and ensuring that women and youth get enough opportunities. From our own experience, we know that many times when those companies that are given contracts and have women and youth, it's basically just on paper. The beneficial owners of those companies are actually not the women and youth. Those are just fronts. So we also need to ensure that actually the beneficial ownership of these companies is made up of women and youth. So there's something else that we need to do to ensure that these opportunities are really going to the people who are more deserving of them.
Hudson, I wonder what your thoughts are about this gender question. I remember when you came and found me here, and you're wondering whether
well, I was about
we're going to be a manual, yeah?
I was about to start the protest, right? So, fortunately, we have two very, very articulate women on the panel, as well as the three articulate, somewhat articulate men. No, I think there are a number of issues. I think the political representation of women is critical, right? And it is not even a matter for debate. It is a constitutional threshold that we must meet. The fact of the matter is we're not going to meet it in this election. So I think there is a crisis coming up the other side of the election. The second issue relates to the use of public resources. And I think the point about procurement is an important one. We look forward to hearing more from the two candidates this morning, this evening. But I think the other issue that I think is really important is making sure that we don't just have women, but we have women with a gendered agenda for this country, right? And we need men with the gendered agenda. So I think we should be asking presidential candidates who are male, what is their gendered perspective about these issues? Let me just give you three very quick ones. We learned last week 5,400 women and girls were raped in the county of Nairobi. What's the agenda to deal with that issue? We have heard that we have one of the highest teenage pregnancies, and the numbers are coming down to like the 10, 11, 12-year-olds, not the preteens, not even the teenagers, but really this very fragile age group. What is our strategy for that? Must we continue to have this sense of denialism around the issue of safe abortion, comprehensive sex education? When are we going to start dealing with the realities that our children are dealing with in a way in which we are not confusing science with our morality? And I think that's the challenge that is forward on the gender issues. I think the very last one for me is this issue around gender parity, because I think we have to look at this from a really sober perspective. It is estimated that we will not achieve gender parity at these current rates until 2069. That is another 40 years from now plus, will we see women's earnings and men's earnings being similar. At the moment, there is a 23% difference between men and women.
Oh, wow. Wanjiru,
what can I add
You've
to
been
that?
speaking quite a bit, but let's talk about this gender question.
Yes, from a gender perspective and from an inclusion perspective, yes, I think I totally agree. And you know, thanks so much, Irungu, for reminding us how expansive this is. And what I'll add is maybe just 2 quick points, is that at the county assembly level, if political parties do not achieve the gender balance, they will then do a top-up. And that top-up of, because the county assemblies must have a 2/3 representation. And the top-up of additional members means that the taxpayer pays more and that the size of the county assemblies are bloated. So there's a game that political parties play where they field as many male candidates as they can. And were it not for the IBC racking their knuckles in terms of the nomination list, it would even be worse. So one, the failure to respect the rule of law and the failure to embrace the gender agenda and paying lip service to it costs us in economic terms. The second is, we did a study on AGPO, and we found that much as you have preferential procurement for youth, women, and persons with disabilities, the thresholds, of course, are not being met by any stretch. But we also found numerous cases where women were saying they have to give sexual favors. They're being extorted in terms of sexual favors to be able to get the contracts, to be able to get the credit financing that they need. So as Irungu is saying, we also have to look at the governance, but also the social context in which we are living, where women are still not able to participate equitably in economic affairs.
Okay, because we are just about to go for the first debate, so let me just get some quick thoughts, Professor Awiti, and then to Dennis.
So I think the elephant in the room here is where we are as a society, period. The place of women in our society, in the way we are socialized, has still not moved up even 1 notch. We're basically trying to apply constitutional and legal frameworks as band-aid to a deep, primordial cultural problem, the place of women in society. This has to come up as a movement. You've got to mobilize the senses of men and women out there to basically move the political needle on this one. Otherwise, we're going to be crying out here the whole time with legislation that we can't enact, constitutional provisions that we cannot basically implement. ODM, for instance, carte blanche just renominated all of its MPs in Western Kenya. They had a chance there to make 50% of those women. They didn't do it. So, and the way Martha Karua's nomination as presidential running mate of a major candidate was greeted by UDA colleagues was just shameful. It shows you the deep-seated cultural norms that we still have to deal with in this country to move women's agenda forward.
Dennis?
No, I think I have nothing to add to this. I'll just say a discussion on gender, just like many of the discussions, you know, we have 2 Kenyas. We have Kenya on paper, which is the constitution. Then we have Kenya core ground, which is reality, which is what Alex is saying. And that's it.
Okay.
We haven't found a way to reconcile them. And I think we're stuck there.
Okay, so all the ladies and gentlemen on this table, before we go for the debate, what's the one thing that those 2 gentlemen must not leave that stage without talking about? Let me start with you, Houghton.
I would like them to address gender. Let's go for that. Gender and women's empowerment.
Culture. How do we move from a culture, a low trust and a culture of impunity, to a culture of trust, especially the political culture?
Trust?
Yes.
What break it down.
How do we, in the BBI they called it the national ethos. I didn't like that term. But we have a culture where corruption is seen to pay. And a study actually done by Aga Khan University in 2015 is still relevant today because the youth don't mind how, I think Kenyans, by any means necessary, you have to make money. We become consumerist, we don't uphold values. So how do we switch that culture? We have enough laws.
Okay, let's go to
integrity for me, because if you're not going to be able to meet all your goals and objectives in your manifesto if you don't look at the software. And that's really our values as a country, the values of the people that you are going to appoint in government, the values of the people around you. That's one question I have, because even for the main, the so-called leading candidates, my question, as they keep on telling us and giving us solutions to corruption, but for me the first problem I see is that they are surrounded by people who have been accused of corruption, some who are even in court, and have been charged with corruption. And so my question therein is, how much do you care about integrity and the values that are so well articulated in Article 10 of our Constitution if you're going to not really consider this as you look at,